Well, hello everyone. This is Data Driven Formula One with Patrick, Henz, and Ganna Pogrebna. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Ganna. Hello, all.
Okay, so today we have an exciting topic, 1987. That's a
Exactly.
great
I mean,
season.
besides that, we have, of course, an exciting topic for each of our episodes. But you're right, 1987. So second half of the 80s already.
Yeah, so 1987 is probably one of the most exciting seasons. There was a lot going on even before the season started.
Right.
And by looking at the grid, you probably can, if you're watching us on YouTube or on Spotify, you probably can tell who the constructor champion was. But if you think that by looking at the grid, you can tell who the driver champion was, you probably will be mistaken.
Exactly. But I mean, just to enjoy the names you have on this list, we have here Nigel Mansell, Ayrton Senna, Gerd Berger, Nelson Piquet. So a lot of big names, names very well known up until today.
Yeah, that's right.
And of course, the legendary connection, Williams, Honda, the McLaren, Tech, the Ferrari. So great names, which promised a great season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and definitely this is a season to watch. So if you haven't seen 1987 season, again, we would encourage you to actually watch some footage. Probably on FIA website is probably the easiest, or FIA YouTube channel. It's the easiest, but definitely try to watch the races, especially some of the races that we will highlight during today's episode.
Exactly.
But a lot happened before, right, with engines.
Yes, exactly. The interesting point after Alfa Romeo left, this also, as they have been acquired by Fiat, there was the idea to deliver their engine to the French Ligier team. But here there had been, I think there are different interpretation why it not happened at the end. One point is that their driver René Arnoux had not been very happy about the engine and mentioned them, comparing them to used food, as you can translate it. Of course, with Italians, such a comment not went well. And due to this, from Alfa Romeo took a clause, activated a clause which they had in their contract with Ligier, and said that due to actions harming the image of Alfa Romeo, they want to cancel this contract completely. So this is the legal reason. As you can see also on this page, it was right at the moment where Fiat acquired Alfa Romeo, and maybe they anyway had been considering going out of Formula One for cost reasons, and also at that time Fiat also had been owner of Ferrari, so that would have been two competing teams in the same championship. So I assume even if this was the official reason, the legal reason why they could cancel the contract, maybe it was also based on costs, that they said we want to go out of the championship, and also, of course, marketing reasons, as they already had Ferrari here.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, obviously, we need to understand that Alfa Romeo by that time was already in Fiat's ownership, and so that was actually probably the main complication. I guess they particularly used René Arnault's words as an excuse more than anything else. I don't think it was the real reason, because I mean there are some sharp remarks that people have made about engines before, and that didn't end the collaboration.
Yeah. So then, of course, Ligier was with a quite big problems, with a quite big problem not having an engine. Luckily, and we will see this also later when we speak about the car itself, they could get an agreement via Arrows to get Megatron engines, which have been rebranded BMW engines as they left Formula One. And so they had the engine, but then you have a problem because you design the car around the engine. And here the Alfa Romeo engine had different sizes than the BMW engine. So you had a car which not have been originally designed for the engine. And this is, of course, a big disadvantage if you're competing against all the other teams which have perfectly cars designed for the engines and all other parts.
Yeah, so I guess we also need to mention that the reason why they had to rename it to Megatron is basically because BMW, they had an exclusive contract with Brabham. And so they effectively just decided to support Brabham, so they couldn't support Ligier under the same brand. So they had to. So effectively, it was BMW engine, but they couldn't call it BMW. So that's why they had to rename it to Megatron.
Right. And anyway, we are a little bit at the end of this turbo period, getting more and more rules restricting the turbo engines, which had been insane in providing horsepower to the cars. So, and that's why FIA implemented an own trophy only for the teams which still use the classic aspirated engines, mostly the Ford Cosworths, because these cars had not been able to compete with the turbo cars in this year. Practically, it was like having, if you would compare it to football, soccer, you having teams from the first and the second league division in the same championship. There had been 4 teams competing to get the Jim Clark Trophy for the best driver and the Colin Chapman Trophy for the best teams, which had been Tyrrell, AGS, March, and Larus Lola.
Yeah, I guess other things that we probably need to mention is that McLaren lost John Barnard to Ferrari as a designer, and so obviously, you know, like a lot of the iconic Ferraris that we remember from 80s were kind of, you know, done with a lot of thinking from John Barnard. And then another guy that like probably the current fans of Formula One know quite well, Ross Brawn, right? So he was a technical director at Haas Lola, and then I think he went to Arrows at the end of 1986 season. So like, yeah, basically in 1987 he was in Arrows team, which was also, I think, a big win for Arrows. Considering
Indeed.
that they got, you know, pretty cool technical director.
Yeah. And with this, let's dive directly into the races.
One more thing that we probably should say at this stage is that we mentioned this when we talked about 1986 season and our special about Keke Rosberg, that Keke Rosberg retired right at the end of the previous season. And basically there were some serious reshuffles in McLaren and Ferrari, because basically McLaren managed to recruit Stefan Johansson And in Ferrari, we have now Gerhard Berger or Gerhard Berger. I mean, it depends on whether you want French or German pronunciation. So,
well, he's Austrian, so maybe the German one.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying, like, it's whether you say Gerard or Gerhard, it just, I guess, depends on whether you're Francophone or not. But yeah, it's, you know, there was some big reshuffles in drivers as well. Yeah. Exactly.
And this will also continue in the next year, and we will mention this when this became aware in the season. Mm-hmm. But now let's go to Brazil, Sao Paulo, Jacarepaguá. Mm-hmm. And if you can see us on YouTube or Spotify, we have this year again, thanks to Ganna, some real nice photos. Like here, Alain Prost in the iconic Marlboro tag with the red and white. And also Alain Prost, first winner of the season, before Nelson Piquet, and the second McLaren with Stefan Johansson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to say this is also a cool race to watch, because it's like the sequence of unfortunate events for all other drivers. So because you know, if you look at the Mansell's car, so Mansell had a puncture in that specific race, and Ayrton Senna had engine failure. So, like, yeah, it's there were a lot of issues for other drivers, you know, kind of with this with this whole race, where like everything went the wrong way. So Alain Prost probably had the least of troubles.
Yes,
which is why he was the first.
Yes, and of course, this is not only maybe a question of luck, as Alain Prost called the professor, was always a driver who not drove always at the limit, over the limit. So due to this, maybe he also caused less technical problems with the engine or the car itself. Yes, he always took quite good care of the machine. And just to mention, we saw again this year the March team returning to Formula One. And then first time back to Europe, San Marino, the Imola Grand Prix, held in Italy, as San Marino is, of course, much too small to have its own Formula One track. So always a little bit a trick to have for the Tifosi 2 races inside the country.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And as I said, as it was inside Italy, it was the last podium for Enzo Ferrari to witness live, because Enzo Ferrari practically never left the country, so he never attended the races outside Italy.
Yeah, so we also probably need to mention that Nelson Piquet couldn't race because he had a huge accident, right, on in qualifying, and basically the doctors told him that he couldn't race. So what happened was a tire failure. And for that reason, Goodyear, which was a tire supplier, they decided that it would be good for the image to fly in new tires overnight for this Saturday. So this happened, like, I think in Friday qualifying. So for Saturday qualifying, they had a new tire on, and yeah, so basically, as a result of which, I think Ayrton Senna was on pole. So before this race, but obviously, you know, Williams was quicker. And Nigel Mansell, as a result, won the race.
Yeah, and the tires should stay a topic for the whole season. And Enzo Ferrari, at least he could see one of his cars, one of his drivers on the podium, as the third position had been reached by Michele Alboreto in this race.
Yep.
Then Belgium, Spa-Francorchamps. Again here, an accident, and as we discussed many times before, Spa-Francorchamps, a beautiful racetrack, also a favorite racetrack of various drivers, but nevertheless quite dangerous.
Yeah, but so this one is very interesting because when Patrick and I discussed previously Mansell and his general sort of driving behavior, like we discussed him as very kind of well-leveled driver, but he was also like at times he could be quite emotional because so what happened in this race. So if you if you watch the race kind of at the very beginning of the race, so Ayrton Senna was kind of, he took a very kind of risky move, and and Mansell was trying to overtake him, and as a result, basically they collided in a sense, and Ayrton Senna could not continue the race, but Mansell managed to kind of pick his car up and continued. But on lap 17, he had to stop because it was quite a significant collision. And later, when the race finished, he basically walked and he grabbed Ayrton Senna by the throat, and they were fighting as a result of that. And this was not the only fight that they had. So that was, I think, the first fight that Mansell had with Ayrton Senna. So yeah, so as you can see, like even though he was this really leveled driver, sometimes he would be very emotional when he would see kind of this really risky driving. And we also have to say here that for a long while, Ayrton Senna, I mean, this is what you can see in many documentaries, Ayrton Senna actually believed that he could not be hurt when he was inside the car. So it was only when he had a couple of accidents when he started to feel that actually he's not invincible. So he was driving quite a kind of, it was a very risky game for quite a few races before then, and that was one of those.
Yep. And just for the statistics to mention, Alain Prost's 27th victory equaled the number of victories from Jackie Stewart. Then we are coming to Monaco, Monte Carlo, and from a technical point, this was the victory for a first time with a car with active suspension. And active suspension at that time was a quite high-tech system used in combination with various sensors on the car to ensure that the car always had the adequate fit to the racetrack. And of course, a big support for the drivers using this technology, at least if the technology was working.
Yeah. Also this is also a very interesting and fascinating race because Nigel Mansell was actually leading for quite a lot of this race, but then he had a technical failure, I think like a boost pressure or something like that. So he lost the boost pressure and effectively couldn't, like the car wasn't basically responding very well, and as a result, Ayrton Senna and Nelson Piquet, so he didn't even end up on podium, even though he was on pole before that whole race.
Yeah, in general, we have to remind the people that in the 1980s, the reliability of the cars was on a complete different level than today. Now, 2024, maybe there's one car with a technical problem who could not finish the race, or maybe two cars. But in the 80s, it was still a high number of cars in each Grand Prix, which due to technical problems couldn't finish the race. USA, Detroit, and another victory for Ayrton Senna.
Yeah, we probably need to also explain why the race was in Detroit, because I think the race was, if you remember the previous years, so we also had Canadian race, right?
Yeah.
But in Canada, they couldn't obtain the sponsorships, and so the only place where they could race, so they had to race in kind of North America, but the only place where they could find the only place I could find that where they could race was actually Detroit. So that's how they ended up in Detroit, because this was supposed to be the Canadian race, like under normal circumstances.
Yeah, it's what we see since the beginning of Formula One. You have races in the country where you have a driver who can compete around victories, championship. And after we lost Gilles Villeneuve as a Canadian driver, with the years, the interest in Canada had gone down. And of course, with this, you have less sponsorship, less people going to the races, and a country is losing its Grand Prix. And of course, Detroit, Motor City, at least on the paper, based on the name, it would be an interesting location for all kind of races.
Yeah, that's right. And again, we had an issue with, again, Mansell was doing, again, pretty well in that race. I mean, I think it just was very unlucky year for Nigel Mansell in general. So again, he was, the car was going pretty well, but then I think when they pitted the car, so it took a lot longer. Like there was, I think, a wheel problem or something like that. So he took, it was like really, really long pit stop. I think it's like he lost like 10 seconds at that pit stop, and basically had to, so effectively had to then catch up with catch everyone else up, and then he also suffered leg cramps, in that race, and so he couldn't basically catch up with the leads. Yeah, and Ayrton Senna won the race.
And I mean, again, for the people seeing us on YouTube, another great photos how Formula One looked in the 1980s with these typical liveries, 1980s design shortly before the start. So, I mean, a great throwback.
So this is kind of the reverse situation from the previous race when Piquet had really long stops, and as a result, so basically he lost about 10 seconds in this race, as a result of which Nigel Mansell was able to win this race.
Yeah, good points. And sorry, also coming back last time to the photo, you see sometimes drivers looking for the small advantage at the start. It was famously known that Gilles Villeneuve always tried to do in the warm-up lap put some gummy on his start position so that he can start faster. And here we see on the third row the Ferrari must be Michele Alboreto with the yellow, putting a little bit on the left so that he maybe can try to overtake the Williams before him. Quite far on the left, so already in a quite gray zone, but here no problems with the regulations so far. And then Silverstone, UK, of course, always like the homeland of car racing, not homeland because Formula One started here, but besides Benetton and the smaller teams from Germany and Italy, all big players are from the UK.
Yeah, so this is also a very interesting race, and like also want to encourage people to watch it because we already discussed with Patrick before that there was a lot of rivalry between Piquet and Mansell within the same, Williams team. And this race, I mean, even on this picture, if you are watching us on YouTube, you see that there are two cars going side by side. So basically, what happened here was that the entire race was kind of between Mansell and Piquet, pretty much, and it was so like they couldn't stop fighting even on the slowing down lap. And on that lap, when they were already slowing down, so after the race, practically, Mansell actually ran out of fuel, and this Honda engine that they had in that car basically blew up. So effectively, like they couldn't stop, competing even though the race was over, and that kind of led to serious car damage as a result of that, which I'm sure factored in a little bit later in the season, as we will see.
Yeah. And for the case that you saw our episode about Nelson Piquet, you are well aware that Mansell and Piquet not had been the biggest friends. As we already mentioned, car tires should stay a topic the whole year. And here a great photo from Alain Prost with practically only 3 tires left.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, so it's basically, well, in Germany, we always have really cool races. I mean, here we didn't have any big surprises, so we still have kind of Williams team at the top. But again, I mean, there was quite serious competition between Mansell and Piquet. And obviously Williams and McLaren, the McLarens. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say sorry. It's of course not Alain Prost. It's Stefan Johansson with the second McLaren. And one important point, interesting point. In the 80s, late 80s, we have different regulations regarding tobacco sponsorship in the countries. So in some of countries, you could read openly Marlboro. In some countries like Germany, it was already forbidden. So that's why you only see the lines. And also there have been different loopholes in different countries. So some countries you had completely put off the logo. In some countries you could redesign it that you could not read it, but maybe understand from the type of the graphic that which sponsor it is. So it was quite a time of changes. And also we should mention that in preparation of the Grand Prix, Ayrton Senna had another tire failure, and this with a speed of nearly 300 kilometers per hour. And one of the problems was he had a puncture, and the problem was that the active suspension system seemed to be unable to detect this puncture. So the sensors not saw the danger for the driver, which of course had been a topic which led to discussion quite similar to today, where we discussed that the risks of AI, that the algorithms based on sensors and databases lead to biased decisions, or maybe not detect real problems as they are not programmed or not have the data to identify these problems. So in an old school way, we had this also here in the Formula One in 1987.
Yeah, and if we consider how like normally pilots are trained, not obviously not Formula One drivers, but pilots, as usually you're trained to not trust any like anything that you see on from the kind of from the machinery, but sort
Yeah.
of just look at whether you are, parallel to the horizon, like whether you're
Yeah.
still horizontal. Because it could be the devices like could be telling you, and sensors could be telling you different information, but you just need to kind of trust your eyes.
Yeah. And then Hungary had been one of the countries with no restriction on tobacco sponsorship, as you see quite clearly on the photo showing the Zackspeed with the West sponsorship.
Yeah, so this race is actually famous more for what happened before the race, because Ayrton Senna left Lotus and basically informed them about it, and Lotus very quickly signed Nelson Piquet, because he was really unhappy with Williams. Considering that he had this very strange position of not being the first driver, or there was no clarity who the first driver was, and so so they basically so Nelson Piquet as a result went to Williams, and so Senna obviously ended up in McLaren, as we know, and everything that happened afterwards
His
in
history.
McLaren, with Alan Prost. So effectively, he was Alan Prost's teammate in McLaren.
Yeah. And after Hungary, we went a little bit to the west, Austria. The last race in Austria until 1997. And as we just mentioned a little bit earlier, the reason why you may have or may not have a race in the country often is if you have a driver. In this case, as you may imagine, the Formula One returned to Austria because of Red Bull, not directly of having or not having an Austrian driver at that at the moment.
Again, a very interesting lead to this race, because here also what happened was that Stefan Johansson, in practice, when he was kind of doing the practice run for this race, he actually had a huge fright, because he hit a deer on the road, like on the practice road. So there was a deer that was just running across, and he hit that deer at huge speed. So he basically practically destroyed the suspension on his McLaren car, and that led to very heavy crash. So that happened in practice.
Yeah. And here's some statistics to this case. Here in the US, deers are the most dangerous species living in the wild, because from all the events where people get killed by an animal, most people get killed by deers, not by wolves, not by bears, coyotes, but by deers. And of course, this always as part of an accident. As you may be aware, when the deer is crossing the street at night and it sees the light of coming cars, the deer normally tries to freeze and not continue running. And so there are a lot of accidents where the car drives into the deer and where the driver or other passengers get killed as a consequence of the accident.
Yeah, and this race was also quite remarkable, because there were two major collisions, as a result of which the race was stopped twice. And then after this race, there was no race in Austria for 10 years. So the next time we will return to Austria, it will be in 1997. So again, quite a remarkable thing. considering, you know, the safety wasn't there. I mean, obviously, if you have like animals that you could encounter during the practice round, it probably tells you that something is wrong with security around the track. But also it wasn't very safe during the race. Yeah.
Yeah. And this reminds me another difference of the 1980s. As far as I remember, there nearly in all the races, the race never really started with the first try. There was practically always one driver who stalled the engine, and then everything stopped. You had to do another lap, and or even if every engines had been actively working, one of the cars not really accelerated as it should accelerated. So there had been a lot of incidents right in the beginning, much less we see today. Okay, then finally Monza. And just to give you again some interesting number, during qualification, Piquet reached a maximum speed of 352 kilometers per hour thanks to the turbo engine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But no, other than that, no surprises. Again, we have two Williamses and Ayrton Senna in the middle. That's kind of what we kind of would expect from that season.
Yeah, because I think it's relatively safe to say that the Williams was much faster than the Lotus of Ayrton Senna. So Senna being between the Williams drivers was not that much related to the car, but thanks to his driving skills. Then Estoril, Portugal, also no that big surprises, only that at the end of the year, the Ferraris had been a little bit stronger.
Yeah, I think that was also a very interesting thing that happened here. So if you remember when we discussed with Patrick, we have a special on Jackie Stewart, we said that Jackie Stewart had basically at the time like 27 Grand Prix victories, and no one could beat that for a very long time. So at this particular race, Alan Prost won this 28th victory, so he actually beat that record. And then that record wasn't actually beaten until Michael Schumacher, who had 52 victories. Yeah, so basically, yeah, so like it was effectively staying like as a record for quite a while as well.
Yeah, but to be fair with Jackie Stewart, back in his time we had less races inside the year, so it's practically only a question of statistics that later drivers would pass these records, considering that there are now more races a year than in the past.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's stay in this part of Europe. We are now in Jerez, Spain, and I think again no big surprises related to the first three drivers: Nigel Mansell, Alain Prost, and Stefan Johansson in the second of the McLaren.
Yep.
Then Mexico City. Again, the first, no surprise, but then Patrese on a third position, so somebody new at least.
Yeah, so so this was also a very interesting race. Again, so Mansell here had a very bad start, and then there were a lot of, you know, interesting factors that happened. So this time it was, I think, that Ayrton Senna was very unlucky because he kind of spun off in that race. But yeah, like no one like expected, I think, Nigel Mansell to win this one, but you know, ultimately he did, because so yeah, it just was like it's one of the most unusual races that you will probably watch. Like, so yeah, again, I would suggest to watch it because there's not many races these days of the same kind of caliber.
Yeah. And Suzuka, Japan.
Yeah, this is a very important race. So far, you probably noticed that Nigel Mansell won 6 races up to leading to this one. But in this particular race, he basically had a serious injury and he couldn't continue the season. That's basically what happened in this race. So that was quite a tragic event for him at this stage. Yeah. And so he had to effectively just abandon the championship, and he was like on the plane to Europe, by Saturday evening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so he effectively he couldn't even compete anymore that season.
Yeah. And then Adelaide, and again some topics about the interpretation of the regulations of some teams, and as you can see here, Senna's Lotus was disqualified due to the brake ducts which not have been complying with the regulations, so a disqualification for him. And due to this, the second position went from Senna to Alboreto, which means after a long time, 1-2 result for the Ferrari team, and a third position for Thierry Boutsen.
Yeah,
this,
so we probably should tell people who won the season. Surprise, surprise, Nelson Piquet.
yeah,
won
Nelson
the
Piquet.
with
Right.
three victories, which is remarkable. And that's because simply Nigel Mansell couldn't participate in, like after the Japanese Grand Prix. So this was the third victory in a row for Nelson Piquet.
Yep.
So third championship.
Yeah. And besides this, from the teams, and this I think is quite less a surprise, as you see the big gap in points between Williams Honda 137 to the second, McLaren Tech 76 points. So of course Williams Honda won the championship.
Yeah, so I mean that wasn't very surprising, obviously, because we had a very dominant car from Williams, and both like we mentioned before, in several races it was basically the battle between Piquet and Mansell.
Yep. So maybe the strongest,
And just to mention the drivers, so we have Piquet, then Mansell, then Ayrton Senna in the third place.
Yep. You're a little bit early. We would have come to this anyway.
Sorry, apologies.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
So, yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to, sorry. Yeah, so anyway, we will come to this again later, so consider this. And I mean, just to mention, if you see again the photo, I think this was the strongest time ever for the Williams team, having these great drivers. And also, if you see the car, for many, this is the typical Williams livery, with the yellow, the dark blue, and the white, with the big sponsors like Mobil, like Canon. So I think a very precious car, not only fast, but only from the aesthetical point. We mentioned in the beginning that there was the Colin Chapman trophy for the natural aspirated car. And also here, I mean, no big surprise, Tyrrell Ford won with 169 points before Lola 43 points. And again, let's have a look on the cars. And as I already said, I mean, for me, this is the, when you think about Williams, this is the car with the drivers and with exactly this livery.
Yeah, and I mean, it also is a testimony that, you know, you can have a car that is effectively just, you know, made innovatively on a relatively small budget compared to the other, you know, giants like Ferrari and McLaren. And yet, you know, you can have a very successful run with an innovative car that just uses a lot of different parts from different suppliers.
Yep.
And that's, of course, mechanical talent of Frank Williams. That's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. When I spoke about classic liveries, sorry, I mean the same is valid for this McLaren, the typical red and white, which for me is the typical livery, even though you have the classic orange today again.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's very kind of iconic for the 80s. But again,
Yep.
for me, the orange car is the McLaren car. But yeah, I mean, this one is like we have a special on. We have a couple of, I think, 2-part special on tobacco sponsorship of Formula One. So I would just encourage you to watch that. And so as we will see, quite a few cars will be then wearing tobacco advertisements. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the reason why our podcast is only for adults, as we have to comply, of course, with the YouTube and other regulations. And I'm sorry that I repeat myself a little bit. For me, this dark blue white, of course, also a very iconic livery, and all. This is for me the typical Brabham turbo design. Very slim, flat, sometimes very fast. I mean, mostly very fast, but unfortunately, some years very unreliable, sometimes winning the championship.
Yeah,
but anyway.
And like we mentioned at the beginning here, you have this BMW logo as well that was exclusive that year for Brabham.
Right. Then, so this is not the second Marlboro team. This is the German Zakspeed 871. We had a special episode about Zakspeed. Very sympathetic team, very, very small team, practically a garage team, but nice to have inside the championship. The same is valid also for the other small teams. Very important in the 80s because here drivers had maybe their first experiences, as we not had the junior teams as we have now in the 2020s. And East had been quite a Me Too product. Me Too meant in the 1980s a copy product. I mean, the meaning has changed, I think, up to now. So the car looked like the McLaren, and of course the cigarettes from West also looked pretty much in design to the Marlboro ones.
Yeah, and if you kind of Google Zakspeed, you will find both East and West type of livery on those cars. So it's very
exactly. And this depending on the regulations, as quite smart marketing. If it was forbidden tobacco advertising in some countries offered you the loophole to change the name. So they put East, and of course everybody knew that it was West behind. So very smart marketing from the West company. Then we have here the Lotus 99 Turbo.
Yep. So again, for the fans of Ayrton Senna, this is probably a car that means a lot. Is a kind of a very famous yellow color, again in tobacco colors of Camel cigarettes.
Yeah.
Very,
to be honest,
very different from the black and gold Lotus that we saw in the 70s.
Yeah. To be honest, for me, this sponsorship was not really fitting to Formula One because if I remember the Camel advertising, it was mostly shown in cinemas because at that time in Germany it was already forbidden on TV, and the Camel sports always had been quite similar to Indiana Jones. So we had the adventurer with the Range Rover somewhere in the desert, somewhere in the middle of the jungle. So the complete opposite to the world of Formula One, from my point of view.
Yeah, but that's amazing how they managed to get everything in the colors of Camel. Even Honda logo is like, you know, traditionally kind of white and red, you know, that we have on practically any other car. Here is blue and yellow, which is amazing to see, to be honest.
Yeah. Then
yeah, arrows, like Ayrton. I said, this is where Braun went that season. So yeah, quite a again very interesting you know, hire, and obviously, you know, like even though not very competitive car, but you know, they had a very good technical director, and eventually, you know, after quite a few years, he managed to build a very successful business.
And besides Ligier, what we already discussed, originally Arrows had been the customer for the Megatron engines, and via Arrows, Ligier got theirs too, as they had been in need quite in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, Benetton. I mean, this is the famous rainbow car. In a sense, it probably is the most colorful car in the history of Formula One, with lots of colors on it, and yeah, and then we will have more sort of subdued colors where we would have primary color like green or blue for Benetton, but this was still very colorful in 1987.
Right. So you may say typically in 1980s, as in general, if you see the statistics, cars in the 80s have been much more colorful than today, where we only have gray, silver, white, black, but in the streets in the 80s, you saw cars in all kind of colors, in more red than today. We had green cars, blue cars, yellow cars. So I think this is a quite design livery typical 80s, and also later the Benetton cars at the end had, as you already mentioned, had quite less color than this one.
Yeah, well, as we discussed before, it had to do with the fact that certain colors look good on TV. We have also like marketing research that contributes to that, when, you know, the customers are asked about like what kind of colors they like and all that kind of stuff.
And of course, you had the United colors of Benetton, which perfectly are represented by this design. And in opposite,
Minardi.
yeah, right. I mean, in opposite to all the colors, this typical two-color car quite dark with a little bit of yellow, but I think very tastefully designed. And here
the infamous Ligier.
Yes.
Again,
And,
with tobacco, logos and things. But yeah, that's the infamous car where they didn't have an engine at the beginning of the season, basically.
Yeah. And this photo is taken from an exposition. I don't know from which year, because interesting here is that it has the BMW logo on the car, which I'm not sure if maybe they had it for the presentation, but I think inside the races they never had the official BMW logo on the car. So I don't know why on this version they put it here.
Well, because effectively it was BMW, but yeah, I mean,
exactly,
at that time, obviously, yeah, they couldn't use it.
Yeah.
They had to use Megatron.
Yeah, so I assume this is from later. This was not in 1977 like this. And last but not least, the Ferrari 126, already in the second version, the C2. We not saw that much about them regarding results. They became stronger at the end. Nevertheless, I think a quite tasteful design of the car, and of course the typical Ferrari red with a lot of Italian sponsorship, Unicam. We had in this time R-chip for a time, so not Shell as they had before and as they have now again. And you see also the big Fiat logo, as at that time Fiat directly owned Ferrari. And you already wanted to speak about the drivers, so here the official statistics.
Yeah, so the first three I think we already talked about. Piquet, Mansell, and Senna.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think interesting coming from the 2020s, you see a big, a relative gap in age. So Nigel Mansell at that time was much younger than Nelson Piquet, 35, which is practically in an age where others already have retired. Nevertheless, he still stayed various years more, also successfully in the sports. Also, Ayrton Senna, 27 in this year, so also a little bit older as you would have imagined he was before he won his championship, especially if you think drivers coming now very young to the sports as Max Verstappen, Leclerc. So from today's point, a difference.
Yeah, so Prost, Berger, and Johansson.
Yep.
Again, so here we don't have a lot of age difference in this
right,
three.
Right. And then we have 7 to 9. And for the first time, Benetton quite strong with their two drivers in the top 9 with Terry Boutsen from Belgium and the Italian Teo Fabi. And of course, we also want to mention who won the Jim Clark Trophy, or you may say the Internal Tyrrell Championship. We have Dr. Jonathan Palmer, who was already, as he entered Formula One, a practitioner, a doctor of medicine. And then second, Philip Strife, and then the other Philip Alliot with the Larousse. Okay, that's all we have for today. As you already pointed out, I think a very interesting championship So typical 80s turbo. If you have the opportunity, please try to see some of the races, which you may find on the internet or maybe also on the official Formula One app, where they have various classic races.
Yeah, so just also want to remind everyone that this is kind of meant to be a podcast. So we just show you some images that we can legally obtain from the public domain. And we encourage you to watch the original footage from certified suppliers of footage, so from the owners of copyright. So please, by all means, check it out. And as always, yeah, we want to encourage you to subscribe and like and comment beneath this video. And obviously, we never claim that we know it all. So please tell us if we've missed anything or you want us to pay attention to a particular element of this season. But very exciting season in general, and I would personally recommend you to watch all the races because they were all quite intense, and this is probably one of the most exciting seasons in the history of Formula One.
Exactly, and as a small bonus, if you like the 80s, I played around a little bit with Spotify and also I think ChatGPT, and the idea if there would be a 1980s action movie, as they have been quite famous in the 80s, here you can find a potential fictive soundtrack album. So just look for data-driven F1 rock and you find this playlist.
Yeah, brilliant. And thanks to Patrick, we're not only on YouTube and Spotify,
Right.
but in the podcast format, we are on a number of different platforms from Amazon to Castro to Google. So please check out those platforms if that's more convenient for you. And thank you very much and see you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.